I mean, talk about a dramatic entrance. With those words, Napoleon Bonaparte pretty much sets the stage for his entire life, a life defined by conflict, ambition, and this incredible, relentless drive for power. What a way to begin.
And that's really what we're here to talk about, the Napoleonic Paradox. We're going to try to untangle the messy threads of the man himself, the powerful myth he built around himself, and, believe it or not, the modern world he helped create, almost by accident.
So here's our game plan. First, we'll get to know the man behind the larger-than-life myth. Then, we'll dive into the biggest contradiction of his rule. Was he a great reformer or a total tyrant? After that, we'll break down his military genius, figure out what actually led to his epic downfall, and finally, try to make sense of his incredibly complicated legacy.
All right, so to really understand the emperor, you've got to start with the outsider. You have to look at his journey from this angry, rebellious kid on an island to, well, the most powerful man in Europe.
You see, Napoleon was never supposed to be a French hero. In fact, he started out as a passionate Corsican nationalist who absolutely hated France. Can you believe that? At military school, he was a total outcast. Constantly bullied for his thick accent, he felt so alone he actually wrote, "I see no place for myself in this world." But then, everything changed. The French Revolution tore up the old rulebook. Suddenly, it wasn't about your noble birth, it was about your talent. And ironically, after all his political games back home, he got himself kicked out of Corsica, which forced him to go all in on a future in France.
And that ambition took him straight to the top. But once he got there, Napoleon became this walking contradiction. Was he this champion of the revolution, or just another power-hungry dictator?
Okay, on the reformer side, his greatest hit is without a doubt the Napoleonic Code. Before him, France's legal system was a chaotic mess of old feudal laws that changed from town to town. Napoleon's code swept all that away. It created one unified system based on reason and equality. It was so revolutionary that it's still the foundation for legal systems all over the world.
And right here you see the paradox in black and white. On one hand, you've got the reformer who created modern legal and education systems. But on the other hand, you have the autocrat. This is the guy who shut down most of the newspapers, created a secret police force, and, oh yeah, crowned himself emperor, basically killing the republic he was supposed to be protecting. He'd hold these votes to make it all look legit, but they were a complete sham. One famously came back with 99% approval. Yeah, right. He wasn't one or the other. He was somehow impossibly both.
Of course, when we think of Napoleon, we think of the military commander. But his success wasn't just one thing. It was this powerful mix of strategic genius, brilliant propaganda, and, as you're about to see, a healthy dose of pure luck.
So how did he do it? Well, he had a few game-changing tricks. First, the corps system. He took his massive army and broke it into smaller, self-sufficient mini-armies that could move on their own and attack with incredible speed and flexibility. Second, pure speed. His guys could march over 30 miles a day, which meant they were constantly showing up where they weren't expected. And third, he was obsessed with information. He would personally question prisoners just to get a real-time, unfiltered view of what was happening.
But his greatest weapon? It might have just been him. His biggest rival, the Duke of Wellington, said that Napoleon just showing up on the battlefield was like adding 20,000 extra troops. He had this amazing ability to inspire his men. He'd eat with them, he'd remember their names, and he made them feel like they were making history.
But let's be real, strategy and charisma alone don't build a legend this huge. There was something else going on, something just as important.
Napoleon was an absolute master of propaganda. He was a branding genius. He hired artists to paint him not as a man, but as a living myth. Look at this painting. It's one of the most famous images in history. Here's Napoleon, calm, majestic, on a powerful horse, leading his army to glory. This is pure image-making.
Now look at the reality. This later painting shows us what it was probably actually like. A cold, tired, determined man on a mule being guided through a dangerous mountain pass. The difference is just wow. One is a superhero pose for the history books, the other is the grim truth of war. And Napoleon knew exactly which image he wanted you to remember.
And then there was luck. The Battle of Marengo is the perfect example. By the afternoon, Napoleon was getting crushed. His army was in a full-blown chaotic retreat. The Austrian commander was so sure he'd won that he literally packed up and left the battlefield. But then, at 5 p.m., out of nowhere, French reinforcements show up. They launch a crazy counterattack and completely flip the entire battle on its head.
A disaster became a legendary victory, all thanks to a few hours and a whole lot of luck.
So, if he was so brilliant, where did it all go wrong? Well, it's a classic story, really. The very things that made Napoleon so successful, his ambition, his self-belief, his confidence, were the exact same things that ended up destroying him.
He said it himself, "I have tasted command, and I cannot give it up." For him, power was an addiction. His ambition, which had once been for France, was now just for himself. He always needed another victory, more glory. He could never, ever be satisfied.
His habit of not listening to anyone, which looked like genius when he was a young general, just became pure arrogance. He started to believe his own hype, that he was invincible, and that led him straight into the single worst decision of his career, invading Russia in 1812. He ignored every warning about the brutal Russian winter and lost almost his entire army. By the time he got to his final battle at Waterloo, people said he'd lost his edge. He was tired, indecisive. His greatest strengths had become fatal flaws.
So, finally, we have to talk about his legacy, because even in total defeat, Napoleon's impact on the world was enormous, and just like the man himself, it's full of contradictions.
First things first, we have to face the staggering human cost. His endless ambition fueled more than a decade of non-stop war across Europe. The result? An estimated 3 million people dead. That's a scale of destruction the continent just hadn't seen in centuries.
But, and this is the wild part, at the exact same time, his legacy is woven into the very fabric of modern Europe. That Napoleonic Code is still the foundation of law in France and many other countries. And here's the biggest irony. By conquering all of Europe, he accidentally lit the fires of nationalism. People in places like Italy and Germany started to define themselves against French rule, which helped create the very idea of those modern nations. And that's not even mentioning the roads, bridges, and schools he built that dragged France into the modern age.
Oh, and one last thing, on the whole myth versus reality front. You know that story about him being incredibly short? Total fabrication. It was mostly British propaganda to cut the great conqueror down to size. At 5'7", he was actually average, maybe even a little tall for a Frenchman back then.
So, we're left with the ultimate question, aren't we? Was Napoleon a visionary who pushed Europe into the modern age? Or was he a brutal tyrant whose ego cost millions of lives? And the truth, of course, is that he was both, a true paradox whose shadow still stretches over our world today.